Good day to you, ma'am. This is our report of Group 2, the fingerprint characteristic and formation. Number 1. Prints is the elevated portion of the skin which is black in a fingerprint impression. A minute pill-like structure or protuberances found in the epidermis of the skin containing sweet pores. So, this is the prints. Na nakita na ninyo sa itsura sa prints. Number 2. Porous is the depression of white space between the rings in a fingerprint in impression. This is the porous, and the porous is na siya white space between the rings of the fingerprint. Number 3. Pattern area is a part of a loaf or roll in the upper deltas rings which we are concerned in regard to the interpretation of classification in the present in all patterns, but in plain and tinted arches is the impossible to define a pattern area of loop and wells are enclosed by the type lanes. So this is the type lanes kanang naay murag circle diya sa center na part sa inyong fingerprint is a pattern area. Number 4. Type lane are two innermost ranges which start parallel, diverge, and surround or tend to surround the pattern area. So this is the type lane. Kaya nakita diya. Divergence is the spreading of a part of two lines which have been running parallel or nearly parallel. So this is the picture of divergence. Ano yung nakita diya na may nag-slide something diya. This is the divergence. And number 6. Bifurcation is the forking or dividing of one line into two or more branches. So niyang nakita ninyo na line og may nag-extend na dagan na mag-dot dia or something that like liko-liko. This is the bifurcation.
Convergence. It is the meeting of two or more ridges at a certain point. Mura siya nagtabo nga ridge sa imong tunga-tunga sa imong fingerprint. Enclosure. It a single ridge which split into two or more branches at a certain point meet again to form a single ridge. Eyelid. It a small enclosure. Kanang mura siya mata nga forma nga nagpalibot nga ridge sa imong fingerprint. That it is a ridge possessing a single pore. Example kanang ridge nga belong to one single pore. Short ridge. It's a ridge of a limited length with two or more pores. Ang iyang ridge kanang murag putol-putol nga limited ra ang iyang pores kanang murag sa ending ridge. It is a terminus of a short or long ridge. Kanang final point bitaw sa imong final point of the
Formation of delta and core. So, what is formation of delta and core? It is a focal point within the pattern areas of loops and whorl are enclosed the focal points which are used to classify them. These points are called delta and core. Delta, it is a point on a ridge at or in front of and nearest the center of the divergence of the type line. So delta looks like this. So delta have 6 types, such as a bifurcation, an abrupt ending ridge, a dot, a short ridge, a meeting of two ridges, a point on the first recurving ridge located nearest to the center and in front of the divergence of the type line. So, a bifurcation mo na siya ang pagbulag-bulag sa ridges. An abrupt ending ridge kanang endpoint sa ridges. A dot kanang mga dot lang nga ridge. A short ridge kanang mugbo nga putol-putol. A meeting of two ridges ang pagtabos sa duha ka ridges. A point, and lastly, a point on the first recurving ridge located nearest to the center and in front of the divergence of the type line. So these are the 6 types of deltas. If delta have 6 types, delta also have rules in the selection of delta. First, the delta may not be located at a bifurcation which does not open towards the core, like this. The second rules in the selection of delta is when there is a choice between a bifurcation and another type of delta, the bifurcation is always selected. So it was clearly explained that kung in selection of delta, kung naay bifurcation ug another types of delta, which was I explained earlier. So ang bifurcation is always selected, just like the picture shown above. So the third rules in the selection of delta, where there are 2 or more possible deltas which conforms to the definition, the one nearest to the core is chosen. So it was simply explained that kung naay duha or more possible deltas is katong types of delta: bifurcation, dot, short ridge, and abrupt ending ridge. So kung naay 2 or more possible, katong ang gipang istorya, kung asa dadto ang mas nakaduol sa core, maoy mapili, must be chosen. The fourth rules in selecting delta, the delta may not be located in the middle of a ridge running between the type lines towards the core, but at the near end only. So the fourth rules in selecting delta was simply explained the given pictures above. So core, it is the approximate center of the fingerprint impression. It was necessary to concern ourselves with the core of the loop type only. Core looks like the picture shown above. So if the delta has rules in selection, core is also have rules in governing the selection of the core of a loop. So the first rule is the core is placed upon the innermost sufficient recurve. Second, when the innermost sufficient recurve contains no ending ridge or rod rising as high as the shoulder of the loop, the core is placed on the shoulder of the loop farther from the delta. The third rule is when the innermost sufficient recurve contain an even number of rods rising as high as the shoulder, the core is placed upon the end of the center rod whether it touches the looping ridge or not. When the innermost sufficient recurve contains even number of rods rising as high as the shoulders, the core is placed upon the end of the farther one of the 2 center rods, the 2 rods being treated as though they were connected by recurving ridges. In fingerprint, we have interlocking loops and having two loops side by side at the center. In these cases, the two loops are considered as one. When the shoulder line X is drawn, it is found to cross exactly at the point of intersection of the two loops. The two loops are considered one, with one rod and core being placed at C.
So see loop information. In fingerprints as well as in the usual application of the word loop, there cannot be a loop unless there is a curve or turning back on itself of one or more of the ridges. Other conditions have to be considered. However, a pattern must possess several requisites before it may be properly classified as a loop. So ihara siya matawag nga loop if present ang iyang mga elements. A loop is a type of fingerprint pattern in which one or more of the ridges enters or either side of the impression, recurve, touch, or pass an imaginary line drawn from the delta to the core. So, in a loop type pattern, makita nimo diha ang imaginary line, which is in between delta and core, where ridge counting happen. So, loop has its essential elements. Loop must have a sufficient recurve. So sufficient recurve is a part of the recurving ridge between the shoulders of a loop. It must be free from any appendages or spoil. So dili siya matawag nga sufficient recurve if ever ang iyang recurving ridge is spoil. Second element is a delta and a core. Dili siya matawag nga loop if walay delta. Dili pa siya matawag nga loop kung walay core. So dapat delta and core is present in loop. Third element is a ridge count across a looping ridge. So dili pa siya matawag nga loop kung walay ridge count. So ridge counting happen between delta and core. So diha makita kung ang fingerprint pattern is a loop. So ridge counting. Ridge counting is the number of the ridges intervening between the delta and the core. It's known as the ridge count. Each ridges are counted which crosses or touches an imaginary line drawn from the delta and the core. Neither delta nor core is counted. So mahitabo ang ridge counting in between delta and core, and in counting dili apilon ang delta and core sa pag-count. So there is a rule in ridge counting. First rule in ridge counting is when the imaginary line crosses or touches the point of bifurcation of a ridge, two ridges are counted. So kung makaagi ang imaginary line sa bifurcation of a ridge, two ridges are counted. Second is when the imaginary line crosses or touches the point of bifurcation of an enclosure, two ridges are counted. So same lang gihapon. Third is when the imaginary line crosses or touches an ending ridge, one ridge are counted. So kung makaagi ang imaginary line sa ending ridge, one ridge are counted. Fourth is when the imaginary line crosses or touches a short ridge, one ridge are counted. Fifth is when the imaginary line crosses or touches a long ridge, one ridge are counted. So sixth rule is when the imaginary line crosses or touches a dot, if as thick, as heavy as the other ridges, one ridge are counted. 7 is when the imaginary line crosses or touches a fragmentary ridge, one ridge are counted. 8 is when the imaginary line crosses or touches a point of convergence of two ridges are counted. And the last rule is when the imaginary line crosses or touches a point of convergence of three ridges are counted. So to sum up, simply, ang pasabot in ridge counting, kung asa makaagi ang imaginary line mupod na ka-ridges ang imong i-count. Pananglitan sa example sa bifurcation. Bifurcation is somehow divided by 2. So, ang ridge ma-divide sa 2, huwag diha makaagi ang imaginary line sa branch ba or sa divided 2 ridges. So, simply, or it means nga, kung i-count mo ang ridge, 2 ridge counted. So, in ridge counting, there are possible nga maagihan sa imaginary line, which is like short ridges, bifurcation, ending ridge, island.
Arc formation. In planes arches, the ridges enter of one side of the impression and flow or trend to flow out the other side with a rinse or wave in the center. It will be noted that there may be various ridges formations such as ridges bifurcation, dots, and islands involved in type of patterns, but they all tend to follow the general ridge contour. They enter on one side, make a rise or wave in a center, then flow or tend to the flow out of the sides. So these are the example given above, and you can see it clearly above the pictures. In tend arc, most of the ridges enter upon one side of the impression and flow or trend to flow out upon the other side. As in the plane arc type, however, ridge or ridges at the center do not. There are three types of tented arches, the type of which the center from defined angle 90 degrees or less, the type in which one or more ridges at the center up thrust in ending ridges any length degree of the horizontal plane 45 degrees or more, and the third is the type of approaching of loop type processing two of the basic essential characteristics of the loop but lacking of the thread. So in the picture above, you can see that there is having an angle of 90 degrees and less, and there is having upon a thrust and the loop of 45 degrees. Tented arches and some form of loop are often confused. It should be reminded that the mere convincing of two ridges does not from the recurve without which there are no loops. On the other hand, there are so many patterns which first sight resemble tented arches but which on close inspections are found to be looped. As where the looping ridges will be found in the most vertical positions within the pattern area, entirely free from the passing of the delta. In connection with types of tented arches, the one which approaches the loop may have a combination of two or three basic loop characteristics. These are of the sufficient recurve, the delta and the core, and the ridge count across the looping ridge. It must be remembered that the recurve must be free from appendage bolting upon the ridge angle between the shoulder, and true count is obtained only crossing looping ridges freely, with a white space intervening between the delta and the ridge to be counted. And an upon thrust must be end up ridges and continuous in no angle being present the pattern classified as a plane arc.
Hole formation. The hole formation is type of pattern in which at least two deltas are present. The subdivision of hole is as follows: the plane hole, the central pocket loop, wall double loop hole, and accidental hole. Having two deltas left and right delta. Delta, a point in a loop and hole prints that lies within an often triangular tree branch or whole central pocket loop, a type of pattern that has two deltas and at least one friction. Ridge forming a circuit, it may be spiral, circular, or oval, or any variant of a circle. Ridge counter, a handheld pointed tool used for counting the number of ridges during fingerprint analysis. Having two separate loop formations within two separate and distinct set of shoulders. Or double loop, a type of print pattern that consists of two separate loop formations with two separate and distinct sets of shoulders and two deltas. Combination of two different of pattern. Whole accidental, a type of print pattern consisting of a combination of two different types of patterns with two or more deltas, or a print pattern type that possesses some of the requirements for two or more different types of patterns.
Whorl tracing. Whorl tracing begins from the left delta to right delta, and no intents is tracing to being on the type line. The point of the extreme left delta is traced until the point nearest or opposite the extreme right delta is reached. The number of the ridge intervening between the tracing ridge and the right delta are then counted. Rules in whorl tracing. If the ridge trace passes inside the right delta and there are three or more ridges intervene between the tracing ridge and the right delta, the tracing is designated as inner. If the ridge trace pass outside the right delta and there are three or more ridges intervene between the tracing ridge and the right delta, the tracing is designated as outer. All other tracings are designed as meeting. When the number of the ridge intervening between tracing ridge and the right delta is 2 or less. When the ridge trace abruptly and it's determined that the ridge definitely ends, the tracing drop down to the point on the next lower ridge immediately beneath the point where the ridge above ends, continuing from there. In this connection, it should be noted that the rule for dropping go to next lower and line applied only when the ridge to improper inking, the presence of foreign matter on the ridge, enlarged porous disease or worn ridge should not be considered as definite ridge ending.
A fingerprint impression made by the papillary ridges on the end of the fingers and thumbs. Fingerprints afford in inflammable means personal identification because the ridge arrangements on very finger of a very human being is unique and does not alter the growth or the age. Fingerprints serves as reveal individuals through identity despite personal denial, assume the names or the changes of personal appearance resulting from the age, disease, plastic or surgery, or accident, and even the crime.
So that was all about the fingerprint characteristics and formation, ridge function, and interpretation. Thank you for watching our video.